Okay, so the next topic we're going to talk about then is stances. This will only be a quick one. So there's three sort of main stances that we utilise. We've got prone, kneeling and standing. Now prone being the most less visible, kneeling being slightly less more visible, and standing being the most visible, right? So the more times you're in the prone, the less visible you are to the enemy. Now other benefits of the prone position is that you should be using this at long range because you can control your breathing, you can control recoil control substantially, right? You get perfect bone support, perfect muscle relaxation, alright? So if you ever get the opportunity to shoot in past like 500 meters, you should be in a prone position. If you've got line of sight and no cover, you should be in a prone position, alright? Because you're limiting your sort of exposure to the enemy. Now, the next stance is the knee, okay, or the tactical knee. Now, this is the most combat effective sort of stance at all times. It allows you to remain agile, especially during like fire maneuver where you got to sort of bound forward, take cover, bang a few rounds down, and then move off again. All right, so lads are always like taking tactical knees, even if you do like a quick map check, yeah, tactical knee, checking marks and stuff like that, and then moving onwards. But shooting from the kneeling position, it should be your sort of go-to stance. So you want to get practice in that sort of position because it allows you to sort of maneuver and remain flexible, so to speak. Now, the standing sort of position, you're only going to be using this when you're sort of clearing compounds and clearing buildings, because this is where you'll be most agile, and you'll be like instinct shooting and snap shooting. Recoil is going to be difficult to control whilst looking down the sight, so you want to be practicing all these sort of stances on the range. Okay, so what I will say to you is just get on the range, try and get like a 500 meter target, and try each stance firing at that target, so you can see what the difference is between like the recoils, like the breathing control and stuff like that. All right. Okay, so the next topic we're going to talk about then is weapons familiarization. Now, there's only sort of two different types of weapon systems that we use. We've got semi-automatic gas guns, and then we've got bolt guns. Everyone's got their preferences or favourites, alright, this is subjective, but in my opinion, Marksman should be carrying a semi-automatic gas gun with him, okay? Now, there's pros and cons to both types, and I'll kind of pick apart each one of them, right? So we'll start with sort of semi-automatic gas guns. So what is it and what happens inside? So essentially with every semi-automatic weapon system, all that's happening is the gas is recirculating, alright, every time you pull that trigger. So when you pull the trigger then, you're releasing the hammer, which is a firing pin, which is a percussion cap, which ignites the propellant in the round, and then there's an explosion which actually causes the bullet to travel down the barrel. Now it's essentially gas pushing the bullet down the barrel. Alright, now once the bullet exits the barrel, that gas is recirculated through a gas block. Now the gas block is usually located around the sort of foresight blade area, right, and the gas comes up through that gas block and it starts to push back a sort of recoil rod assembly, right. Now that pushes back all the internal working parts inside the weapon, and at this point the empty blast is ejected. Alright, now on the other end of the weapon there'll be a buffer spring, so as the working parts are coming back under the pressure of the buffer spring, it will come forward again, picking up another round in the magazine and feeding it into the chamber. Alright, that all occurs every time you sort of pull the trigger. Now this gas blowback system happens in a split second, but it can throw off the harmonics ever so slightly, making gas guns less accurate at longer ranges. So you'd struggle to hit a target at a mile because of this. Now, a mile being 1609 meters, yeah. So ideally you're sort of limited to around 1,000 meters, and that's a good shooter. But the sort of benefits of having semi-automatic weapon systems is that you get high magazine counts, alright? So you're looking at 20, 30 round magazines. They're lighter rounds as well, which means you can carry more ammunition, yeah. You're getting shorter barrels, so you can run like 16, 18, 20 inch barrels, alright. So they're shorter than bolt guns. You can get a higher rate of fire down, okay. Some semi-automatic weapon systems have a fully automatic capability, right, and you can get a higher rate of volume down, okay. You can start getting 7.62 rounds down, especially if you're in like a section attack, fire maneuver or troop attack, yeah, you can start getting 7.62 down, so essentially you're a GPMG gunner, right. And you're adaptable as well. You can get in the mix with the lads, you can clear compounds, you can bang on doors and all that sort of good stuff, yeah. CQB, Obua, all that sort of stuff. Now my perfect sort of semi-automatic weapon to run with, I want something with a high magazine count, so yeah, 20-30 rounds. I want a scoping system that can reach out to let's say 800 meters easy, with a CQB sight on the top. Okay, so red dot sight, which means if I need to clear a compound, I can just quickly switch to the red dot sight. Right, and essentially a short barrel, so 16-18 inches. That's my sort of perfect semi-automatic run weapon that I'd run with. Now, bolt guns then. So what is a bolt gun? Now, compared to the semi-automatic where the gas recirculates everything and manipulates it around and puts it into the chamber, it's for you. With bolt guns, you have to manipulate the working parts yourself. So every time you pull the trigger, only one round is exposed at a time. So you need to manipulate the working parts to actually feed around in the chamber each time, right? Now, you need to be careful when choosing calibers with bolt guns, because heavier bullet means more weight, meaning less you can carry. So I'll never run with a sort of 338 or a .5 because it's just too heavy. Even the weapon systems are just too heavy, so it's pointless. But they are a lot better accuracy at longer ranges. You get less wind deflection because you get faster muzzle velocities, meaning that they hit targets quicker. But essentially you get longer barrels, so they're not ideal for CQB, and obviously you're limited to like one round at a time because you're losing that sort of semi-automatic capability. So there's the sort of differences between the two, so it's entirely up to you what you choose, but I'll give a few examples of what I run. So I love running with 5.56. I mean, I run M16s, Mark 12s, SPRs, but I also like the sort of 6.5 rounds, like the Creedmoor rounds. So in armour especially, I run the sort of MXM now and again, but my sort of playground is 7.62, like, 'cause I love the 7.62 NATO rounds. So I mean, the L129 was the weapon system that I use in the Corps, so that's my sort of go-to gun. But I love HK417s. I mean, I've shot that a couple of times as a civilian. Scar H, I've used that a couple of times. But the M110, the SR25s, I mean, these are great weapon systems as well. Okay, they're all like sort of 20 round magazine capability. But if I ever get the opportunity to run a sort of bolt gun, then I'm only choosing the XM 2010, which is an ESR, because I can fire the 300 Win Mag, right, which is a great round, which is a hoof in addition to armor free. So I actually love running with that weapon. And if I'm ever like pissing about on the range, I'm always like cutting about with that. So it's completely subjective, I mean, what you choose, and I'd highly advise just like practicing, getting on the range and just trying different weapon systems, trying different calibers, trying different ranges, alright, and just feeling what works for you, and try and run a sort of fire maneuver with a semi-automatic weapon system, or try and clear a compound. Yeah, just go through the drills as if you would a rifleman and see the sort of difference. So yeah, that's my sort of spiel on weapons familiarization. Okay, so this topic then is it's going to be on why things are seen in Camouflage. Now I'm not going to cover why things are seen, because I've done a video on that already, so feel free to check it out. And it is quite an interesting video, which covers an important part of fieldcraft. Okay, it's actually like how we see the enemy and how the enemy spot us. So it's definitely worthwhile. But regarding camouflage and concealment, now you want to be utilising cover and concealment at all times if possible, and especially utilising the high ground if possible, right? But being careful not to sort of skyline yourself, especially in daytime, right? Also important is blending into your environment with the clothing that you're wearing, as this will provide an element of concealment. So obviously your uniform comes into play in regards to the environment that you're operating in. So concealment is breaking up the outline of your shape, right? Especially your head and your shoulders, which are which stand out the most, because the human body is quite a significant shape, right? It's easily identifiable, it's easily recognisable, right, as a human. So you want to break up especially the shoulders and the head if you can. So you're out there like sort of taking tactical knees, get in the bushes, alright, get behind a tree, get in the shadows, anything that conceals or breaks up your shape. Yeah, this is good soldiering, this is good fieldcraft. And being an efficient marksman is all about sort of positioning and using the sort of terrain to your advantage, right? Using elevation to your advantage. This shows that you're situationally aware, that you're tactically aware at all times. I can't express how important cover is either. To me, it's paramount. I'm always looking for my next available cover at all times, and I sort of maneuver or direct myself towards that when I'm sort of pushing forward, right? So I'm always looking for my next available cover if I'm like fire maneuvering. Also, the most important thing with like sort of long range shooting is a clear line of sight. So if you don't have this, then it's pointless trying to get a shot off. I mean, obviously this can be difficult if you're navigating through woods or dense vegetation, but it's something that you should always be striving for. Okay, so that's sort of camouflage and concealment. Okay, so the next topic we're going to talk about is the poor man's horse. Now, when I'm talking about sort of poor man's horse technique, what it is basically is it's running around with a 300 meter zeroed weapon. That's all it is, pretty much. I mean, I said earlier that most sort of battle rifles are 0 to like 300 meters. I do the same thing with my scope rifle, right? If I've got a target at like 500 meters or 800 meters, then all I've got to do is just check my dope and compensate for the remaining mils. So if at 100 meters my mils will be 0, yeah, 300 meters I'll dial in 2 mils and maybe run around like, and then I'll run around with 2 mils, right? So if a target's at 500 meters, then I'll check my dope, and then my dope for 500 meters is 5 mils. So then all I need to do is compensate for that extra 3 mil because I'm already dialed in for 2. Does that make sense? Okay, it's quite a simple process. Now, if I get a target at sort of 100 or 200 meters, it doesn't really matter because the trajectory would still be able to hit the target. It'll be pretty close to sort of my center of my crosshairs as well. So essentially, they're just bullet drop hold calls. All right, that's what it's like, wind calls, like left and right. These are just elevation hold calls, and this is pretty much how I run every time. And you can shoot up to about 800 meters before you just like properly dialing in. So yeah, feel free to go out and try this sort of technique. It is quite handy, and it can be quite fast as well, like quite smooth. Yeah. So if I'm zeroed in at 300 meters, I've got a target at like 526. I'm just holding sort of 2.5 mils. Right. So that's how I run, and that's the sort of poor man's horse technique. Okay, so in this topic we're going to be talking about the misfire drill. So what is a misfire drill? So let's say for example that you've got point of aim on a target, you've got a good line of sight and you engage that target, and then unfortunately you miss that target for some unknown reason, but you've seen your bullet splash. This is when you would then carry out the misfire drill. Now this is where semi-automatic weapon systems come into their own because they can get back on target quite quickly and potentially fire off 1 or 2 more rounds. If your bullet splashes on the sort of center line of your crosshairs, then you know that your elevation, your zeroing is correct, so all you need to adjust for is your deflection, your elevation. Now, the reason you missed it might have been because of a bad wind call or because canton of the weapon system, but it doesn't matter as long as you can test and adjust and change your point of impact into your new point of aim, then you should be able to get back on target quite quickly. Now, you're limited with bolt guns because you've got to manipulate the bolt to put another round in the chamber and get back on target. This is going to be a lot slower process, and this could give the enemy time to sort of get in cover or sort of bug out of the area. If you're manipulating the bolt, you're going to leave your eyes are going to come off target. Do you know what I mean? So you need to be aware of that. But that is essentially the misfire drill, and this is where semi-automatics come into their own. So don't be afraid to practice this and miss on purpose, so that you have to carry out and test and adjust to actually hit that target. Okay. Okay, so the next sort of topic I'm going to talk about is moving targets and sort of methods to how to sort of intercept and take out moving targets. Now, this is one of the most difficult things in shooting, right, moving targets. There's only sort of 2 sort of methods that we use. I mean, I only use one, but you need a lot of practice to actually like pull this off. So I'm going to talk about like tracking and leading. So tracking and leading are they're pretty much the same. All you're doing is looking at your target, looking at the sort of direction that they're traveling, and you're sort of leading in front of that target. The best thing to do is put your crosshairs on that target and sort of move your scope in the sort of direction at that speed, and that's how you judge that speed. Now, if he's continuing on in that direction, then you can lead maybe 1 mil in front of him, okay, depending on the sort of range. If he's at like 500 meters, I might give him like a 1 mil hold. If he's at like 800 to 1,000 meters, I might give him like a 2 mil hold, okay, because I'm sort of adjusting to sort of the bullet to meet him at that destination. Okay, obviously it takes time for the bullet to fly into that sort of area. So it's kind of like an ambush method, but there is an actual sort of ambush method as where you're anticipating where that enemy is going to obviously move to, and it is an ambush. So what you're doing is you can spot where the enemy is, where he's moving to, and you actually move your crosshairs to either like the left or the right to actually meet him at that point. And then as he becomes like 2 mils closer to that point, then you would engage. Or 1 mil closer to that point, then you would engage. So you are like ambushing him. But leading is probably the most popular sort of form of taking out moving targets. But this is where semi-automatic weapon systems come into their own, because if you fire 1 round, you can see the splash, you know how much you've led, you can then test and adjust. Alright, so you can fire 2 rounds. Alright, so boom boom, boom boom, yeah, double tap it. So this is why I like running with semi-automatic gas guns, especially with moving targets, because I've got a lot more rounds to actually like take him out with. Okay, so moving targets is something that you really need to practice with. So what I would suggest, especially with armour, is put a couple of blokes down on the range and blat a couple of rounds near them so they actually get running, and then you can start engaging moving targets. But if obviously you're playing other games, then yeah, just practice with moving targets anyway, and try tracking, try leading, try ambush methods. Alright? Okay, so in this topic we're going to be talking about sort of reticles and scoping systems. Right, so most battle rifles these days have an optical sighting system, and these increase range. Right, gone are the sort of days where we're just using iron sights. Iron sights are only sort of used now for CQB or primarily in the jungle, where you need to be completely aware of your surroundings and you're not getting fixated into sort of tunnel vision. So I'm going to go over the sort of most popular reticles and sighting systems that are most sort of commonly used and what you want to be using. Now, the first one that is primarily for sort of like the rifleman's role, and this is the ACOG. Now, the ACOG is a ballistic reticle with aiming hold points. So ballistic reticles are fixed ranges or hold points to compensate for bullet drop at those ranges. Now, they can be accurate, but they're also limited in range magnification. A lot of them don't have wing hold points either. I'm not sure about the new ones. I think the new ones do actually say that, but I remember the first ACOG that came out in when we were on Herrick 5 in Afghan, and they were pretty Gucci, to be honest. They had like 4 times magnification, emergency red dot, CQB reflex sight on top, right? They had illuminating crosshairs, and they had bullet drop hold points for 4, 6 and 800 meters. Now, they were accurate, but as you're like punching that to 800 meters, you're suffering with accuracy. You can't really go wrong with this, but yeah, as I said before, you are limited in magnification. I mean, 4 times magnification is great for a rifleman because you're only shooting at sort of 300-400 meters. But if I'm running around with a DMR with a scope sighting system, then I'll take one of these with me and swap it out if needs be, so I can get involved with the lads, so I can crack Obua, I can start cracking CQB, right? Now, there's sighting systems that are very similar to the ACOG, and this is in the form of like the LDS, which was the ACOG upgrade in the Marines, and that's pretty much the same as a ballistic reticle with crosshairs. The same as a sort of LCAN, alright, which I think the LCAN had a sort of rangefinder, sort of static rangefinder with it as well, and they were found on the sort of SCAR Ls and the SCAR Hs, right. So these are sort of sighting systems that you want to be using, especially as a rifleman, alright. Okay, so now we're going to talk about mil dots. Now, mil dot reticles is probably the most popular sort of reticle out there for sort of scoping systems. Some sort of up-to-date Schmidt and Bender mil dot systems run a Stadia line rangefinders on them, alright, so you can actually incorporate judging distance with them, alright. But another thing with mil dots in regards to wind deflection is that I spoke earlier with holding for wind instead of dialing for it. Now, a lot of guys using mil dots will dial in wind adjustments because they don't like holding out into space. Because there's only sort of a crosshair, simple crosshair, if you need to hold out on a wind call, you've got those 4 quarters that are quite empty, do you know what I mean? So it can be quite difficult to hold for wind. So a lot of people don't like them. Now, because there's no sort of refined wind hold core markers, it's just empty. But they are a nice, easy sort of reticle to use, especially for a beginner. So it's something that I still rock with all the time. I mean, I love the mil dot reticles because I can utilise the mil dot ranging formula, okay, for judging distance. So I highly advise that. The next one then is sort of a PR1 military reticle, which is very similar to the mil dot system. But instead of mil dots, you use hash or tick marks, and these can be more precise than mil dots, because if you need to hold for like 1.8 or 1.9 on a mil dot, then the actual dot or the mil dot system, then it could actually sort of cover it up, whereas with hash or tick marks, it's easier to sort of ping a 1.8 or 1.9. Okay, so that's the sort of PR1 mil dot system. Now, the other scoping system that you got out there is the PSO1, and this is found on the sort of Dragunovs. Okay, now this is a ballistic reticle with chevrons. Okay, so you use chevron style hold points to compensate for bullet drop. They do have sort of wind hold points on the horizontal planes, alright, and you've got like a Stadia sort of rangefinder there as well with sort of a parabolic curve. I can't remember the unit measure. I think it's quite small on that. I think that rangefinder found on the Dragunov, I think it's for a 1.7 that they use for the unit measure for a man-sized target. I can't remember. But this is one of the easiest marksman rifles to use in real life. Okay, now I work in maritime security, and my first ever job I had in like 2010. I was given a Dragunov, and I've never used it before. And I got given a PDF, and I read through it, and within like 20 minutes I could pick it up and start blatting rounds. And like 13-year-old kids in Afghan can pick this up and start blatting rounds accurate, right? So it's quite an easy weapon system to use, and it is quite fun, alright. It's a great sort of semi-automatic weapon system, and the sort of PSO1 is sort of attached to that at all times. It works alongside it, coincide it at all times. So highly suggest you go out there and give that a little blat. But the reticle system that I'm mega fond of these days is the Horus and Tremor reticle. Right, so there's a picture there showing you what it looks like, and these are so unique is that they've got refined aim and reference points, and these are wind hold points. Okay, so you never really need to dial in for wind. You can just hold, which is so much quicker, so much smoother, and so beneficial. Right, they're also extremely handy for carrying out the misfire drill, because if you've misfired, you can actually locate how far off you are by the mils. You're not holding that into space like on the mil dots. You're not holding that into nothing. There's a refined point, right? Which is great obviously if you've missed low of the target, because these refined hold points are below the sort of crosshairs. But you can be more precise with your follow-up shots. So this is something that I highly recommend, like Horus and Tremor reticles, if you can get your hand on one. I know in armour they're only sort of limited to 8 or 10 times magnification, which isn't perfect, but for a marksman it's spot on. Alright, so that's the sort of Horus and Tremor reticles. Okay, so other kit and equipment that I'm going to be taking in, I want to be taking a sort of emergency CQB red dot sight. Okay, this will either be a sort of reflex or a holographic. It's just handy if I need to like get amongst it, clearing compounds and stuff. If I'm shooting under like sort of 100 meters, I can quickly like take my scope off and bang this on and just crack on. Alright. Also a bipod. All my weapon systems will be carrying a bipod because it allows me to shoot from a stable position. Alright. Always carrying a rangefinder. Some rangefinders take into consideration your elevation, alright, so they can actually give you the actual range, alright, which is what you want. But yeah, I always sort of like carry a rangefinder, but I don't rely on it. I like to mess about with the fundamentals, you know, trying to judge distance, trying to sort of estimate range. I like sort of cracking sort of fieldcraft in that regard. Kestrel then. Yeah, I always pretty much carry a Kestrel. I will sort of look at trees and flags and stuff like that to sort of try and judge it on my own, because I don't really like relying on technology, but I will always take a Kestrel. Now with a Kestrel then, you want to be actually turning your character to the wind, right, so you can get wind direction and strength, right, because it will differentiate now and again. Daggers and vectors then, I don't run with this, but they are pretty cool, man, to be honest, because you can connect the two. But the vector has got limited range. That's why I don't like taking it. But if you can connect the two, it will give you the actual range, because it can it'll take into consideration your elevation and the target's elevation because of the sort of laser rangefinders, which is quite cool. But yeah, I don't use it. Sometimes like to take the mini dagger, because the mini dagger can give me my elevation above sea level, which is quite handy, because then all I've got to figure out is the enemy's elevation. Alright, I don't take the Tragomex as it takes way too long to set it up, and I prefer to make adjustments on the fly anyway, because it's more sort of combat efficient. Yeah, it's smoother. So I don't take that. Now, pistols then. Now, if you're taking a long barreled rifle or a bolt gun, it's not ideal for CQB, so you're gonna need to take a pistol. So this is where practicing sort of transitioning like from one to the other is apparent. So you will need to get on the range and actually sort of blat a few rounds out until you've got empty magazine, and then a quick transition, alright, to your pistol. Now, quick dip then, I didn't have a secondary on Afghan on Eric 5, but I did on Eric 9, which was a SIG 226. And I've got tiny hands, yeah, so like the SIG was too much for me, if you know what I mean. So when they brought the Glock 17 in, I was quite happy, but transitioning from one weapon system to the other can be quite a unique skill. So yeah, you do need to practice it, alright. Okay, so what I'm going to go through now in this sort of final topic, I'm just going to go through a quick demo of sort of my routine and how I acquire, sort of adjust and take out targets, so you can maybe get a general idea of how it all sort of comes together. And hopefully you can see that it can be quite fast, it can be quite smooth, but a lot of the time it's just rough estimates and sort of testing and adjusting. Okay, so the first thing I do then is obviously get myself into a position, nice line of sight, and I'll try and ping a target, right, and get the target distance. From here then, I'll align my sort of weapon system. Okay, so I've got like sort of natural alignment, and then I'll check the elevation. Okay, now if the elevation's less than sort of 10-degree cosine angle and the range is less than 1,000 meters, then I won't really sort of adjust for elevation. But if the angle is more than sort of 10 degrees, then I'll either add or drop 0.5 to 1 mil on the fly. Okay, that's how I sort of test and adjust. But that comes in practice, alright, so you need to get out of the range and sort of practice that. Okay, so from there then I'll zero my weapon for bullet drop compensation, alright. So that's pretty much just implementing my mil radians. Okay, so just implementing my zero. And from here then I'll check my wind speed and my wind direction with the Kestrel. Now, using the sort of 4 meters per second, 4 miles per hour unit of measure, I'll measure it to 100% value, right, regardless of what direction it is. So if it's like holding 3.5 for a 4 mile per hour wind, then I'll have 3.5 as my sort of number to go off, and then if the wind direction is oblique, then I'm holding like 1.7 to 1.8. Okay, that's how I do it, so I'll half it. From here then I'll take my shot, probably miss because I'm moving like that, and then I'll go straight into my sort of misfire drill, and then testing and adjusting. Now if I've got a Horus reticle, then the misfire drill is easy because I can just see my fall of shot, see my splash, and then just test and adjust, like bring it over to a new sort of point of aim. Yeah, so the misfire drill is obviously my point of impact, and my new point of aim will be that point of impact. Okay, and then yeah, so it's just a test and adjust until target drops, and that's pretty much it. It's quite simple, it's quite smooth. So yeah, feel free to get out and practice, but I'll leave this sort of video running for maybe like a minute so you can just see a few more times that I'll go through it. Alright. Okay, so in summary then, that's the marksman's role, and it can be fun. It is like a sort of support role or a specialist role, but a few things that I want to go over is sort of like practice on the range. Alright, range time is always beneficial. Yeah, it's not just about blatting rounds down at certain ranges, it's about practicing judging distance. So yeah, practicing the appearance method, practice the unit of measure, practice mil dot ranging. Alright, try and like put targets at different ranges and using the mil dots. Yeah, practice wind hold calls. Alright, wind can be so like fluctuant on your round. Okay, so you need to like learn how wind sort of affects it, learn about different calibers are affected by wind. Alright, how they have different sort of trajectories and muzzle velocities, how they hit the target quicker. Alright, practice elevation shoots utilizing sort of cosine angles. Yeah, there is a big difference. Practice moving targets. Alright, trying to hit a moving target is nails. Yeah, it's easy with like semi-automatic rifles, especially like 300 meters, because you've got limited range. Right, the round will get there quickly, but at longer ranges it becomes a pain in the arse. Yeah, firing at different stances. Okay, this can be like massive difference between. So yeah, firing at different stances, utilizing sort of fire maneuver. One of the other ones is create your own dope. Yeah, create your own range card. A lot of games out there, you will have like different sighting systems, and the hold points for bullet drop compensate will be different. So if a hold drop, you might not even be able to manipulate the mil radians. Okay, you just have bullet hold reticle compensating points. Yeah, so learn where your hold point is on that sort of graticle. Yeah, so yeah, I always I always have a sort of notepad and pen calculator next to me when I'm playing, just for that reason. Also, kit selection is so important. Clothing, blend in with your surroundings. Yeah, weapons that you choose, something that's relevant to the task at hand. Alright, so kit selection is very important. With armour, then I always try and keep your weight to sort of 30 kilograms. You don't really want to be going over that because of stamina and stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much my sort of summary. So that sort of concludes today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it and maybe learned a little something that you can take away and apply. If you did enjoy it, then feel free to give it a little like or a comment. And that being said, enjoy your day. Peace out.